The 365 Days of Christmas by R. Smith Killiper, illustrated by Vern Skog. Once upon the true time of 1906, in the real prairie town of Antler, North Dakota, a legendary figure known as Santa Claus was caught in a snowstorm on the night before Christmas. Some 5 years later, in late spring of 1911, he returned with Mrs. Claus to the town where he was rescued. That trip changed his entire life. Months had passed since the children of many lands had unwrapped their Christmas gifts, sharing that joyous day of giggles and delight with family and friends. The normally jolly old man sat in one of his favorite chairs, staring into the fire in the fireplace in his modest home at the top of the world. Mrs. Claus had never seen Santa so unhappy. Try as she could to get him to speak, he continued to remain silent, just staring and staring and staring at the fire deep within his own thoughts. Finally, Santa said, "Sarah, I feel sad, very sad. My old bones are not as young as they once were. Another Christmas has passed, and after all those years of bringing joy to children, I feel tired for the first time in my life." "Nonsense," Sarah chimed in. "You, weary? You, not jolly? Fiddlesticks, humbug, nonsense. I can't believe it." "Sarah," Santa said, "you know how much I love children with all my heart. While I truly enjoy bringing happiness to people, the fact is we all grow older. Besides, deep down, I really feel that after all these years of trying to make people happy, I've made myself very sad. I feel I have failed. Too many people seem to forget the true spirit of Christmas the very next day. The real joy of Christmas, the spirit of love and caring, should be practiced every day of the year." Sarah replied, "You may be right about too many people forgetting the true spirit of Christmas so soon after the holiday season, but you can't stop trying. What you need is a change of scenery, a vacation. Since we never get to go away together between your toy making and our pre-Christmas planning, now is the perfect time for a long overdue trip together." "But where would we go?" Santa asked. "You, the man who has traveled all over the world, ask me that question?" Sarah laughed. "What about visiting the town of Antler, where you were saved in the snowstorm of '06? You still talk about that place. I'd like to see it for myself." Within a matter of days, the packing was done and the reindeer harnessed. Santa and Sarah lifted off into the early morning sky, heading southward on a journey they would never forget. The winds and weather had been good to them. They arrived in record-breaking time. As Santa banked his sleigh, he pointed out to Sarah 2 branches of water below. They looked like reindeer's antlers. As the legend goes, this is how the town of Antler got its name back in 1905. Continuing on, he circled the town square, pointing out the spot where he had gone down in the blizzard of 1906. Then he gradually headed eastward and brought the sleigh down at the creek about a mile out of town. They noticed the tips of the first blades of green beginning to appear within miles and miles of melting whiteness. Spring had come to North Dakota. Not wishing to make a fuss, the Clauses dressed in simple clothing and walked into town from the creek. There, Mayor Traum, in the middle of getting a shave, rushed out onto the boardwalk with lather still on his face to welcome the unexpected visitors. He ushered them into Mr. Moses' restaurant, where they visited with him over coffee and homemade cherry pie. He was delighted and surprised to see his friends. He soon learned why Santa was not feeling up to his usual self, and he vowed to see what he could do to help him feel better. After the Clauses had checked into Brown's rooming house, they spent the rest of the day helping the townspeople celebrate the Settlers' Parade. There were covered wagons, a tightrope walker, a bagpipe player, steam thrashers, children's games, and lots of good food and visiting to enjoy. Following the parade, the mayor took the Clauses on a full tour of the town, including the newspaper office, the bakery, the harness shop, the photo studio, the telephone office, the opera house, and the railroad depot. The trip had, within several days, brought some of the color back into Santa's face. The mayor decided to surprise Santa and share his own brand of Christmas gift in April. He got Santa to agree to be blindfolded to play a game with some of Antler's children. The children spun him around 4 times and then walked him over to the First National Bank building. The mayor removed a curtain and the words "Santa Bank" appeared. He then took Santa inside and showed him a painting of himself. On a small wooden plaque beneath the picture were the words, "Mr. S. Claus, President, Santa Bank, 1911. Santa was deeply touched to be offered a job as president of the bank. Being a modest fellow, he found it even more difficult to decline. He thanked the mayor, but indicated that he didn't know anything about banking, only about toy making and distribution and caring for children all over the world. The next day, as Santa and the mayor were visiting in the cafe, a chilling scream was heard across the square. Faces appeared at windows. People rushed out to see what was wrong. Mrs. Heidi Pearson, a widow for many years, pointed to a black, funnel-shaped cloud that was moving in from the southwest. "A tornado! A tornado! A tornado! Derek's out there in the storm! Help! 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 Please, somebody help!" she cried. In an instant, Santa raced out to the creek, jumped into his sleigh, and headed straight toward the dark cloud that was threatening to carry away the young boy. The wind and dust made it extremely difficult for him to locate the youngster. Branches, rocks, pieces of boards, pots and pans, dust and more dust swirled and swirled around him. He tried to shield his face with one hand while hanging on to the reins with the other. He kept looking in vain for Derek. One moment he thought he saw him, and then he didn't. In another brief moment he did see the boy's two little hands holding onto a fence post. Derek was exhausted. He had used up almost all of his strength clinging to the post. His legs were airborne, his body about to be sucked up into the center of the tornado. For years, Santa's trusty reindeer had never failed him. Now they were about to meet their most difficult challenge. Santa pulled in on the reins and made a sharp turn. In an instant, he managed to scoop up Derek with his right hand, while still holding on to the reins with the other hand. Visibly shaken, the old man and the boy headed back to Antler Square, where they landed safe and reasonably sound. The townspeople cheered. That night, after the lights were turned out and the Clauses were in bed, Mrs. Claus reached out her hand to Santa. She placed it in his and said, "You are the bravest man I have ever known, as well as the kindest. All that talk about being tired, being old, not being needed anymore was just nonsense. God must have sent you here for a reason. I love you very, very much, and the people of the world continue to love you and need you as much as I do." As they drifted off to sleep, the sky cleared, the stars were bright, and in the moonlight a bit of a twinkle began to reappear in Santa's eyes. He began to realize that maybe he wasn't so old and tired after all. The very next day, Mrs. Heidi Pearson and Derek came to visit the Clauses. They both expressed their deepest thanks to Santa for his daring rescue. The Clauses invited them in for a family-style breakfast. Over steaming pancakes, crispy sausage, fluffy eggs, and homemade hot breads and sweet rolls, Santa thanked Derek for helping him during the rescue. Derek didn't quite understand what Santa meant. "You know, Derek," Santa explained, "you also rescued me from a different kind of storm. It's a storm that can kill many people before their time. I was starting to call it old age. When you are young, it's hard to imagine what it is like to live a long, long time. One day you realize you are not young anymore. You begin to slow down. So, you see, my rescuing you also helped you to rescue me. Despite my age, I now realize how important it is to never lose one's sense of adventure, as well as the joy to be found in every moment of every day." After breakfast, the old man and the young boy went outdoors for the entire day. They went biking, played hide-and-seek, then played some baseball, and even jumped a rope or two. Mrs. Claus could hardly believe her eyes. Santa had, indeed, became his jolly old self, and it wasn't even Christmas. Mrs. Pearson was just as surprised and pleased. She then shared with Mrs. Claus the fact that Derek had become an orphan at an early age, and she had cared for him up until now. However, due to ill health, she felt she couldn't take care of him much longer. She asked Mrs. Claus if she knew someone, somewhere in the world, who could give the boy a good home. That night, when Santa returned, Sarah had an idea. Something that she had never discussed before. Maybe they could adopt Derek and provide him with a home. A chance to have a child of her very own. After a quiet supper, Sarah told Santa the whole story. "What? Me adopt Derek?" Santa said. My, oh my, oh my. I have already adopted all the children in the world. Besides, we're not as young as we once were." "There you go again," interrupted Sarah, "talking old. Have you forgotten so soon what you did when you thought you were too old? You not only rescued the boy, but ended up playing games with him all day long, and you didn't even look a bit tired. Just think, we have a chance to finally have a child of our very own, as well as continue to take care of the world's children." "Where would he sleep?" asked Santa. Our house on the North Pole is so very small. There isn't even room in the toy shop. You know it's filled up most of the year." "I know that," Mrs. Claus replied. "I wasn't thinking of Derek coming to the North Pole. I was thinking of the North Pole coming to Derek." "What do you mean?" asked Santa. "I mean," said Mrs. Claus, "let's move from the North Pole to Antler." "What? Santa give up the North Pole? That's like asking me to shave off my beard and asking me to wear a purple suit. Santa's supposed to wear a red suit." Supposed to. You know the reason you started to lose your spirit in the first place was when you began to talk old, act old, and believe you were getting older," said Sarah. "Now here's a chance for a whole new life, a wonderful new adventure, and a chance for us to be parents to a wonderful little boy. You don't have to give up the North Pole. You can still keep it as a distribution center for all your toys and at the same time create new ones here in Antler. You have been offered a home, a job, and a new beginning. Let's try it. Let's take a chance. Even at our age. Let's do it." "You know," said Santa, "I have always loved you even though I haven't always listened to you. If that's what you really want, then we will do it." With the last traces of snow continuing to disappear, the Clauses had to move quickly. They left Antler, returned to the North Pole, and packed and packed and packed. Years of memories from so many Christmases past. After a farewell look at the snow-capped land that had been their home for many happy years, they prepared to leave. They said their goodbyes to Groke and Savannah, their closest elfin friends, and left them in charge of the new distribution center Santa had planned. "Oh, dear friends, I hate to leave you and my North Pole home, but I'll return from time to time, you can be sure of that. The time has come for me to change. All of us face that at some time in our lives. My arthritis has been acting up. It just might be better for me to go south to North Dakota for the warmer weather," Santa told them. Groke and Savannah hated to see Santa leave. However, they realized that wherever he went, the North Pole would always be a part of his life. In no time, they were airborne. The 5 sleigh sections were neatly tied and bounced along behind them, carefully guarded by Santa's ever-faithful dog, Tundra. As they approached the North Dakota border, the angry winds of spring, coupled with the booming, crackling thunder and flashing lightning, suddenly surrendered to a massive double rainbow. As they passed through it, they realized that they were heading toward a new life, a new home on the prairie. Upon their arrival, Mayor Trom greeted Santa with a surprise. "In behalf of the citizens of Antler, and as our way of welcoming you and Mrs. Claus to our community, we hereby present you with this horse and buggy. It will permit you to get around town while your reindeer are getting a well-deserved rest before the next Christmas season." The Clauses were deeply touched by the kindness and generosity of the people. After expressing their thanks, they took the shiny rig out for a spin. Santa whispered to Sarah, "It's been a long time since I've experienced the true spirit of giving, as well as receiving, beyond the Christmas season." A farm near the edge of town had also been provided for Santa and Sarah by the townspeople. Santa settled in at Santa Bank in his new job as president. With late spring at hand, he had no time to lose getting their land ready for planting. For many years he had dreamed of working the soil. Being a farmer at the North Pole was no easy task. The sullen, gray-black clouds to the west gave way to a new day, a new light. A sunlight of oranges, grays, blacks, blues, and whites. Against the endless landscape, the bearded old man appeared to grow younger and stronger as his shiny steel plow sliced deeper and deeper into the rich black soil. Any doubts he may have had about his age or his life or his purpose seemed to disappear. He had begun to realize that every day was as special as every child, that within one's lifetime there are thousands of billions of things to see, to feel, to do, that the true joy of Christmas, of faith, of caring, and of love can only begin when people understand that and begin to share that with others. Summertime for Santa brought even greater joy. In between his farm work, his bank work, and his toy making, he could be found at Antler Creek swimming with the children, playing games and going on picnics with Derek and Sarah. Fall came early in 1911. After cutting and binding the crop, Santa and his neighbors stacked the bundles in shocks. Then they let them dry for several days before they thrashed them, separating the wheat from the straw. The wheat was then hauled to the granary. Soon the sky became black with birds beginning to migrate south for the winter. The golds and rusts and oranges announced that autumn was at hand. Once the harvest was completed, Santa could be found in his workshop putting the finishing touches on his toys. The first chill of winter frosted over the prairie. October moved all too soon to a very cold November, and then on to an even colder December. Suddenly, it was early in the evening of the night of December 24th, 1911. A familiar figure wearing a red coat and black boots could be seen crossing the Antler Square. He stopped to finish loading his sleigh with gifts and then walked behind the bank to a very small chapel. Santa removed his coat and outer boots and sat down quietly on the pew. He bowed his head and gave thanks for all the good things that had happened to him during the past year. Then he offered a special prayer for all the children all over the world. His Christmas Eve journey started at Antler Square. He continued the custom he had begun in 1906 of placing the first gifts there as an expression of his everlasting thanks to the people of the town that had rescued him. After completing his world tour, he returned safe and sound just in time to place the presents for his family under his own tree. Derek and Mrs. Claus had been waiting anxiously for Santa to arrive. Santa quickly freshened up, and the Claus family opened their gifts. Santa gave Mrs. Claus a bouquet of flowers, one from each country in the world. Derek gave Santa a necktie with a deer on it. He had painted it himself. Mrs. Claus gave Santa a gold watch. The Clauses gave Derek his very own bike, a baseball bat and glove, and most important of all their love. The Clauses celebrated Christmas Day surrounded by family and friends. As Santa was starting to carve the goose, Duane and Nancy Shell dropped in to wish the Clauses a very Merry Christmas. Duane noticed the empty chair beside Santa. Santa explained, "That chair is reserved for people of all ages who believe in and remember the spirit of Christmas 365 days of the year." "What a wonderful, wonderful thought," the Shells agreed. They went on their way, determined to share Santa's Christmas feeling with their friends. After the meal, everyone helped clear the table. The children went out to visit their friends. Santa and Sarah put everything back in order. They stood next to one another at the window watching Derek building a huge snowman. They had adopted a child, they had found new friends in a new place, and Santa was truly back to his jolly old self. Santa gave Sarah a gentle hug. She heard him say, "I love you. You are my very best friend. May the spirit of all your Christmases continue to be with you 365 days of every year. And to all of you, children and adults alike, may this same spirit be with you for all of your Christmases 365 days every year."